gold. How that our perceptions, and we hear these things, the images that come to mind, and how sometimes our thinking in respect to glory land and the streets of gold are misled. And a lot of that has to do with Catholicism and some of their superstitions and things and false teachings that, people have this idea that after this life there's only heaven. Heaven's just a part of it. And they've mixed so many different things together. The idea of Peter being having the keys to the kingdom, and he's the keeper of the gate. When we die, we see the pearly gates, and Peter's there. Whether or not he lets us in, and all of that comes from Catholicism. But understand, as we singing those songs, I was thinking, there is heaven right now, and this is where God's throne is. This is where God dwells. And when we die, as a saved person, absent from the bodies, be present with the Lord. We're in heaven. When we talk about glory land, that's not heaven. The Lord's going to come back to this earth, and He's going to rule and reign on this earth for 1,000 years. And that's part of our afterlife, because that's after our resurrection. That's after our glorification. And we're going to, come back from heaven with Him to the earth and rule and reign here on the earth for 1,000 years. And so some of the things that the Scriptures talks about the millennial kingdom, about the lamb lying down with the lion and so on and so on, that's the millennial kingdom. That's not heaven. As far as I know, the only lion in heaven is Jesus Christ, who's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He's also the Lamb. But then this heaven and earth is going to pass away. The Bible talks about there's a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem. And it's the new Jerusalem where the streets of gold are. It's the new Jerusalem that has the gates of pearl. That's not heaven. It comes down from God out of heaven. And we will, the saints, the saved of the ages, will populate a new earth. The nations of the saved will walk in the light of that city. And so on. And so, that is the glory land. That is where we're going to spend eternity. And those three, heaven, the millennial kingdom, and then the new heavens, the new earth, a lot of times gets all mixed together and jumbled up together in our thinking, and I just, those thoughts was running through my mind as we were singing that, and I wanted to take a moment here to kind of clarify that in our minds, that when we're reading something or talking about something, let us kind of learn to distinguish which we're talking about and not confuse them as some have done. Anyway, this evening we're looking at Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs chapter 7. More warnings here. If you will, concerning the strange woman. And we're going to use this evening. There's 27 verses. And use it to kind of spring it off into some related subjects that I believe that are important and related to the very things he's talking about here. But first of all, let us read these 27 verses, Proverbs chapter 7. My son, keep my words and lay up my commandments with thee. Keep my commandments and live, and my law as the apple of thine eye. Bind them upon thy fingers, write them upon the table of thine heart. Say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman. that they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger which flattereth with her words. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones. I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner. And he went the way to her house in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. And behold, there met him a woman with the attire of a harlot and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn, her feet abide not in her house. Now is she without, now in the streets, and lieth in wait at every corner. So she caught him, and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him, I have peace offerings with me this day, have I paid my vows. Therefore came I forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thy face, and I have found thee. I have decked my bed with coverings of tapestry, with carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with loves. For the goodman is not at home. He is gone a long journey. He hath taken a bag of money with him, and will come home at the day appointed. With her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. He goeth after her straightway, as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteneth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. Hearken unto me now, therefore, O ye children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways. Go not astray in her paths. For she hath cast down many wounded. Yea, many strong men have been slain by her. For her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. And so we see here the warnings against what he refers to as the strange woman in verse 5. But we see also in chapter 2, verse 16, he refers to as the strange woman. In chapter 5, verse 3, again, he refers to as the strange woman. In chapter 6, verse 26, he says, by means of a whorish woman and the adulteress that will hunt after a precious life. And so here he refers to as the strange woman, the whorish woman, an adulterous woman. And so he's warning. He says, my son. He begins again with an admonishment and exhortation to listen, to remember the instruction of the parents. And especially as we see in this, it's written as a father to his son. But let us also understand this as parents to our children. And to, as God is our Heavenly Father, to each of us as His children, to listen, to pay attention, to remember, to hearken to. He says to hide His word in our heart. That is to take His word and internalize it. Let it become a part of us. And let it control our thinking. Let it help monitor our hearts and direct our hearts in the things that we desire. Let God's word be there for us to instruct us and to remember it and to make those life choices based on His word. And we'll see more of it. But notice especially in that thought in Ephesians chapter 6, how this is reinforced then also in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul, writing here to the church at Ephesus says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." You know, there are some absolutes in life. There is a right and a wrong. And he's saying, you know, the very first thing, the very most basic and fundamental thing that we learn or ought to learn in life as children is to obey our parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. See, out of the 10 commandments that were given, this was the first of the commandments as it was given, that was given with a promise attached to it, that if you do this, you know, a lot of them had some penalties attached to them if you disobey them. But this one, there was a positive promise attached to this commandment. It's, you know, as we've read before, and Jesus said, "What's the first and great commandment?" He said, "To love the Lord thy God, all thy heart, all thy mind, with all thy soul." This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, to love thy neighbor as thyself, on these two. But in between those two, he says, "Children, obey your parents." This is the first commandment with a promise attached to it. He says, "That it may be well with thee, that thou mayest live long on the earth." This is the promise that God gives to us. That if we honor our parents, if we respect them, if we listen to their instruction, if we mind them and are obedient to them, he says you will live a lot longer than if you're disobedient. That's the implication. You will live longer and you will have a better life than if you're disobedient, if you're stubborn, if you're rebellious, if you mistreat your parents or disrespectful to your parents. And so this is as much an important part of the things to be learned as we go through here. And he lays his foundation again and again as the preface to what he's going to say, as a reminder that we need to listen and pay attention. He says, "Keep my commandments and live." See, this is consistent with what God has said, and that which is repeated then in the New Testament. "Keep my commandments and live." He said, "Bind them upon thy fingers, write them upon the tables of thine heart. Say unto wisdom," and here again, now wisdom and understanding he personifies as a woman. In contrast to the strange woman. And so he's personifying wisdom as your sister. He personifies understanding as thy kinswoman. You know, and I was thinking about this and this admonition. The women in our life to whom we may look as an example of a godly woman and a source of advice when it comes to the affairs of the heart. You know, sometimes, and this is maybe true for both men and women, and we have to do a little bit of the role reversal here. If as daughters, who do you look to for advice about men? Sometimes you look to your father, you might look to an uncle, you might look to a grandfather, someone like that. He's saying to the sons, you look to your sisters, you look to your mother, you look to your grandmother, you know, your kinswoman. these people that are in your life that are examples of a godly woman, they're supposed to teach. And so if you have questions, if you need advice, you look to them. And again, even in 1 Timothy, we go back into the New Testament here, where Paul was admonishing Timothy in chapter 5, 1 Timothy chapter 5, he says, "Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren, the elder women as mothers, and the younger as sisters, with all purity." And so we see this example here of those, even in the church, and how we treat our brothers and sisters in Christ is related to the idea of the family. And this becomes such an important thing. And I'm probably not going to have time to get through all of this because I'm kind of digressing and talking, but the idea at the core of this is the idea of the family as God has established it in under His leadership, under His protection, under His blessing. The family, husband, wife, children. And many people today, because of, on one hand, because of the good example of the family, has established the idea that that's kind of the goal in life, is to grow up, to get married, to have children, to have a family. And in our minds, it's kind of like mom and dad, or like grandma and grandpa, go back a few generations. That's kind of our idea, because they're the examples to us that we have growing up as our parents, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles that surround us. And so we have this idea that this is what life is about. And when I grow up, I'm going to get married, and I'm going to have children, and I'm going to have a family, and so on. But then that idea, that concept gets derailed. And people don't stop and consider what goes into making that up and making that successful. And they just run out and get married and think somehow it's going to work out for them like it did for grandma and grandpa and their aunts and uncles and so on. And unfortunately today we have so many examples of broken homes where it didn't work for mom and dad. It didn't work for aunt and uncle. And so this whole thing gets kind of jumbled up. And these admonishments here are to help lay a foundation, particularly in the minds of young people, to avoid the pitfalls, to avoid the problems, the errors that can lead to those situations. And as God's people, we come to know God at different times in our lives. Sometimes some people are already married before they ever come to know the Lord. They did not have that instruction. They did not have that foundation laid for them before they got married, and then they come to know the Lord. So the idea, though, is this is the ideal. This is how God has instructed and intended. And as much as is possible, we need to instill this in our young people and set these examples for them. And so, the idea of the keeping the commandments, of having wisdom and understanding as alongside you, to advise you, to instruct you, and to point you in the right direction as you would your kinspeople around you, the people that you look to. And primarily here in this context is to avoid what he refers to here as the strange woman. And this can refer to literally a person, or just as wisdom and understanding is personified here as a woman, as a sister, as a kinswoman, as the virtuous woman. Then the strange woman may also embrace the idea and the concepts of sin, the departing from the things of the Lord, the lust and adultery and these things as well, so that they may keep you from the strange woman, which flattereth with her words. You know, and one of the things he warns here against is flattery. Don't allow yourselves to be flattered. And this can apply to both men and women, young boys and girls. The example here in our text is that of a young man in verse 7. But it applies to all of us, and even as adults. You know, we should have learned this as a child, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we need to be reminded. You know, don't be beguiled by flattery. We all like to hear positive things said about us. That's human nature. And because we like that, and it's a good way to motivate people too. Well, Satan understands that, and he can also use that same thing against you. And so, flattery has the idea of false praise. And so, you know, it's one thing when somebody's saying something positive about you and they mean it, and it's real, and it's genuine. That's one. That's not flattery. Flattery has the idea of false praise with an ulterior motive. And keep that in mind. And that's where wisdom and understanding comes in, that allows you to distinguish the difference. To be able to recognize the difference between genuine praise for doing something good and flattery, which is false praise with an ulterior motive. Now, the strange woman flattereth with her words. And it mentions this over and over again through here. Every time he's talking about the strange woman, he brings up the flattery of her lips, the flattery of her words. And kind of cutting through some of this, he says, you know, see, I was looking out my window and observing people down in the street. And I observed among the simple ones a young man. He's setting the stage here. But have you ever observed people? Have you ever sat in a public place where people are coming and going and just watched people? See, evidently Solomon did. He could park himself there at his window and look down on the busy streets outside, and he could observe people. He was an observer of people. He understood human nature. He understood because God had given him wisdom. And he was open to God's wisdom and allowed God's wisdom to direct him. Not always, because he did some pretty foolish things himself. He didn't always follow his own advice. And that happens. Because even men of God and great men of God are still in the flesh and subject to the flesh at times. But he said, I saw this young man void of understanding. And that goes back to why he exhorts his son, my son. You know, keep my commandments. Keep these things. Say to wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman. Make them as close to you as your kin, as your family. Because here I observed a young man that was without understanding. And he succumbed to the flattery of the strange woman. without going through all of this, but verse 18 stands out. And we've got to take a few minutes here to look at verse 18. Come, let us take our fill of love. And here, love is used to express the idea of physical pleasure. Love is the excuse for so much sin. And we hear it all the time. People talk about they fell in love and then they fell out of love. You didn't even know what love was. You didn't fall into love and then out of love. That's not love. If you can fall into it, it's a ditch. It's a pit. You know, it's a hole in the ground. It's not love. Love isn't something you fall into or fall out of. They confuse love with infatuation and lust. Physical attraction. And I want, because so many people confuse love with this physical attraction. And I want to make this statement to you young people not yet married. Physical attraction is the worst possible reason for two people to get married. And yet that's the main reason that most people do get married. And I want to read a little bit here. And one of the greatest examples of someone who got married for the wrong reason was Samson. And we go back to the book of Judges. Judges chapter 14. And begin with verse 1. Judges 14. Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. What did he said he saw her. So what was he taken by? Her physical beauty. That's how he saw her. Then his father and his mother, and what is it we just read? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. His father and his mother tried to tell him, this isn't right. Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? Samson was a godly man. He was, one of God's people. And what is it? We've talked about marrying, unbelievers with believers. So don't do it. But Samson insisted, get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. He was taken with her physical beauty. And we notice down verse 7, and he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. Now he talked with her, and the idea there has to do a mutual or oral communication. So, we had a lot of interests in common. I mean, he talked to her. And said, see, we have a lot of things in common. Now, those two things is what most people base a marriage on. You look at the outward appearance, he is so handsome, he is such a hunk, and when we get together and we talk, and we have so many things in common. He must be the right one. She must be the right one. She pleaseth me well. That is, she is right in my eyes. But it didn't say it was right in God's eyes. He didn't listen to his father and his mother. And it didn't come out well. Now, we read on that God was in it in the sense that he was setting Samson up to create animosity there, a hostility there, a state of war between him and the Philistines, because he's going to use Samson to judge and deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines, who had political control over them at that time. But when you notice the things that Samson was basing his desire for this woman on, it was her physical beauty, and they had so much in common. But there were some things they didn't have in common, which are the most important. And that was a common faith in God. A belief and a commitment to and obedience to God. And that should be an underlying part of what we base a marriage on. And so, as I said, love, what people call love, gets blamed, and is really the cause for much sin. God has given us the capacity to love, but he has also given us the capacity and given us the responsibility to control and channel that in a proper way. And that is what the world forgets. We want to read about love. 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. And here, charity, it's translated the word charity, which is agape, which is the strongest form, the highest level of love, of benevolent love, and unselfish love. And it has to do with seeing and providing that which is needed, not necessarily that which is wanted. We think, well, I love somebody and they want this, so I got to get it for them to show my love. No, that's not love. Paul goes through a list of things here. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity or love, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity or love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity or love, it profiteth me nothing. He said, all these things that we can do, if it is not out of a genuine love, an agape love, which he outlines here for us, it's no good. And so he begins to describe love, this kind of agape love, and I would say that this is the kind of love that God had for us. Kind of love when it says God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on him should not perish but have everlasting life. He didn't give what the world wanted. He gave what he saw and knew was needed. And so, true love does not always give and bestow that which is wanted, but that which is needed. And so he says, charity or love suffereth long. It's long-suffering. It is kind. Love envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. That is, there's no pride. If we have a genuine love, and we don't have that love naturally. The love of God is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. This is the kind of love that God creates within us, first of all for himself, and causing us to realize the love that He had for us, and then we're able to experience that love and be filled with that love that we might show it and manifest it to others. And so there's no pride, does not vaunt itself, is not puffed up in love, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Love never faileth. So you don't fall into and out of love. Love never faileth. Agape never faileth. The outward beauty is going to fade. And if that's what you base your relationship on, then yeah, you're going to fall out of what you call love, that was not love to begin with. People's minds and attitudes change. You might have things in common now, but as you change, as you grow, as you learn new things, those attitudes, the ideas, and thoughts may change. If that's your basis of compatibility, then you become incompatible. And so that you hear all the time where people got married and then they divorced because of irreconcilable differences. Well, what was the marriage based on to begin with? You see. Well, we just fell out of love. We grew apart. Oh, you hear all these different excuses. A good example and illustration of marriage. This kind of represents God. It's a triangle. And the husband, the wife. As each draws closer to God, they're drawing closer to each other. So a relationship that is based, first of all, on an individual, a mutual relationship with God. A desire to be obedient to Him, a desire to grow in grace and knowledge of the Lord. As individuals, then when you unite in marriage and together you grow in the Lord, you're growing closer together. You're not growing further apart. For someone to grow further apart is to go away from God, go away from the Lord. So, this is an important part of it. So, love. So let us fill ourselves with love. Let us take solace ourselves with love. That is such a lie. And he said, and her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. Well, he yielded to the flattery. He yielded to the deceit because, as James says, we're tempted when we're drawn away of our own lust and enticed. She enticed him, but there was a lust there to begin with. And instead of controlling that, he was without understanding. He didn't understand what the consequences was going to be. And so he yielded. He goes after her straightway. He says, as an ox goeth to the slaughter. He says, as a bird hasteneth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. He said, he's warning you. When you yield to that, you go after that, you yield to the flesh. This is a life and death question. And you may not die immediately. Sometimes they do. So, my husband's gone. He won't be back till next week. He shows up unexpectedly. And sometimes, death can come rather quickly in those situations. But that's not the real point here. The real point is that it destroys the life. It is a way, and so he says, he sums it up in beginning with verse 24. Hearken unto me now, therefore. He said, I've seen it. I've watched it happen. So listen to me, because this is what happens. Hearken unto me now, therefore, O ye children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways. You know, we talk about incline. We're inclined to something. Well, that has the idea of going up. Decline is going down. You know, he yielded, said, don't allow your heart to follow after her ways. Go not astray in her path. Her paths lead you astray. Sin, lust, the desires of the flesh, they lead us astray. For she casteth down many wounded. Many have been wounded. May not have died, but there have been many wounded. Sin will wound. Sin brings hurt and sorrow and grief. So many strong men have been slain by her. Many, you know, you think of men of reputation, good men, and they've been destroyed because of this very indiscretion and sin. So her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. And so he warns us again in a very strong way, very vivid way. You know, and we're warned, Galatians says, you know, be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. If he sows to the flesh, of the flesh he will reap destruction. Her ways are the ways of despair, destruction, death, and hell. Learn and be wise. Listen to your parents. Listen to God. Listen to what is right and pleasing in His sight, not in your sight. Don't just go after something because it pleaseth you well. But let those things please us. Set it in your mind and heart to desire and seek after those things and to be pleased with those things that please God. That is the way of life. Prosperity, goodness. As the psalmist said, then surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There is the good place. That is what we should desire and seek after. Let us stand together then.